Okay, now I would like to introduce our next guest for the next panel. Very special guest. We have Piet de Bruyn, General Rapporteur on the rights of LGBTI people to the Council of Europe and author of the Council of Europe's report on intersex human rights. Ruth Baldacchino, the co-chair of ILGA World and the director of Intersex Human Rights Fund at Astrea, the Lesbian Foundation for Justice. They played a role in the passing of the world's most advanced legislation for trans and intersex rights, which passed in Malta in 2015. And then, last but not least, we have Laura Carter, a research and policy advisor on sexual orientation and gender identity at Amnesty International. She authored Amnesty's report, First Do No Harm, on the situation of intersex people in the Danish and German healthcare systems. Welcome.
Thank you.
Go ahead.
Okay, thank you very much. First of all, thank you for inviting me and having me here. It's both a pleasure and a privilege sharing the information I managed to get together doing my report on people with an intersex condition. Before explaining in just a few words what's exactly in our report and our recommendations, I like to mention in just a few words what exactly is the Council of Europe and what's Council of Europe dealing with. Council of Europe, as you might know, was founded in 1949 after the Second World War to provide or to work together for a better and a safe future in Europe. And it's mainly focusing on three very important issues: the promoting and protecting of human rights, secondly, democracy, and respect for the rule of law. So those three main focus points are the basics of the work of the Council of Europe. Through the different bodies and institutions the Council of Europe counts. I myself, I am a member of the Parliamentary Assembly of the Council of Europe. We are, let's say, a group of politicians appointed by the national governments, by the national parliaments, to be part of the Council of Europe, and we are debating, discussing human rights, democracy, respect for the rule of law every now and then. Within this Parliamentary Assembly, there is the Committee on Equality and Non-Discrimination, and within this committee, I was asked to do a report on the situation of people, of intersex people. And to be honest with you, the first time I heard about intersex was representing the Council of Europe at the IDHOT conference in Montenegro. IDHOT meaning the International Day Against Homophobia and Transphobia, held on May 17th. And the Council of Europe's Human Rights Commissioner was presenting his issue paper, position paper, and I don't know exactly how it was called, dealing with the situation of intersex people. And for me, it was something new, but I felt immediately we as a committee, as members of parliament, we should do something with it, with this very sensitive topic. It is important to raise awareness. It is important to share information that is available and to focus on the human rights violations people with intersex condition are facing on a daily basis. So I reported back to my colleagues, and they agreed for me to do a report on this issue. The report itself was adopted in October 2017, so just a few months ago. And the main recommendations, I think I can summarize them, yes, will be 5 recommendations that I like to mention to you. First of all, and I think it's very important after what we have heard just earlier this morning, that there should be in each and every country, 47 member states of the Council of Europe, they should prohibit this type of unnecessary medical interventions, surgery, hormonal treatments, when the child has not given its informed consent. They should prohibit it. And they should defer the interventions until the child itself can take part can be part of the decision-making process. And then it can be debated whether that should be at 14 or 16 or whatever. That's another debate, but there should be, first of all, a ban on this type of unnecessary medical interventions, because we don't know what will be the identity, the gender identity of the child, and we know for sure there is no medical need and no medical benefits in undergoing this type of very aggressive and invasive types of surgery at such a young age. So that would be the first recommendation of the report. Secondly, and I think it's as important as the first one, is every single member state should make clear, should be very positive about a healthcare system that includes the needs of people with an intersex condition, and not just the people themselves, but should also support their families and relatives. And not just at a very young age, but actually throughout their entire life. Because we've seen, or we've heard horrible stories about what can happen, what can go wrong, and how difficult it can be to identify yourself and to find your place in society. So we need our healthcare systems to be adjusted to do exactly that. And then we're not just talking about the medical professionals, but social workers as well, nurses, even the school system, etc. They should be well aware of what it is, what it means to be born with an intersex condition. So training and family support are very important regarding this issue. And very important as well is to have a legal gender recognition system that makes it easy for people to change their legal gender status as they feel. It should be based on self-identification or self-determination. So if they were assigned male or female as a gender marker upon birth, but they identify themselves later on opposite, then they should have easily access to a legal gender recognition system that makes it easable for them to change their registration of their gender. And I was quite shocked and surprised that the Icelandic anti-discrimination legislation is not sufficient for the protection of the human rights and the rights of intersex people. So that's the fourth recommendation in the report, that all countries should make sure that their anti-discrimination legislation is sufficient for, or includes people who are discriminated on the basis of their sex characteristics. So if it's not done by pointing it out specifically, as Malta did, then it should be included in, for example, the notion of sex or gender or whatever is in anti-discrimination legislation. And finally, and I think maybe I could have started with it, we need, and all member states need to raise awareness among their public in general, but also among all kind of professionals who are likely to get in touch with people born with an intersex condition. And raising awareness is it's something that the importance of it can't be over-exaggerated. It's really of the greatest importance to do so from a very variety of angles. So not just including the medical professionals, but including all other professionals likely to come in touch with intersex people as well. And the basic principle is the full respect of the physical integrity and the bodily autonomy, as explained to us earlier. So in a nutshell, these are the 5 recommendations included in the report. This means that the report itself will be, or has been distributed to the several member states, and they have, in a way, to report back to the Committee of Ministers of the Council of Europe what they are doing based on this report. So I will give a follow-up on the report over the next few months, and then we'll see whether some countries change their attitude, their laws, their their approach of people dealing with this condition. So if there are any questions, please feel free, but I think for now I will leave it as it is, and I'm glad to share my experiences with those wonderful colleagues, if I may refer to myself as an activist as well, from Amnesty International and ILGA. Please.
Hi everyone, I'm Ruth Baldacchino. I'm coming from another island, quite different, but still, you know. I'm co-secretary general of ILGA, which is the International LGBTI Association, and I'm mentioning this also because this is how I got involved into intersex activism and also supporting the intersex movement. Thank you. And being from Malta, and Malta has been mentioned, you know, a few times now. You know, I'm going to share a little bit of what we've done and how did we end up, you know, having this law in Malta, of all places. You may know, there may be a few things you know about Malta, and Malta's usually not the first country to do anything. Especially when it comes to social issues and human rights. And just to give you a little bit of context, in 2011 we were still fighting to have divorce in Malta. So it is within that context that we were working also on gender identity and sex characteristics issues as well. So the change in Malta also, I think, was bigger than, you know, for us than maybe it could be in other countries. But it happened, so I thought I'd share with you how we got there, the actual law, and now what, you know, where we're at as well. So ILGA, together with ILGA Europe, has organized these international intersex fora since 2011. And in 2013, we decided to have the forum in Malta. So we had a group of intersex people coming from all over the world, really discussing and sharing not only their experiences, but also agreeing on next steps and strategies to work with governments and human rights institutions on international level, especially. During that meeting, we invited the newly elected Minister for Equality, you know, to come and listen to intersex participants share their stories. This was a newly, we had a new government being elected in 2013 after 25 years of having the Conservatives in government. So this was like really, for us, an opportunity as well to move some things. So the minister came and all she said was, I'm gonna sit down here and I have no idea what intersex is, but I'm listening. So I'm here to hear your stories. And this is what happened. Participants shared their stories. You know, they shared their experiences, but also the practices, what's happening in their countries. And one thing we learned from working internationally is that the practices that we've heard about, you know, that Kitty also shared with us, are happening everywhere. Regardless of where you're coming from, they're happening everywhere. Mm-hmm. And the minister was truly shocked because she really wasn't aware of what was happening in our own country, you know. So, and when people went back home, she reached out to us, you know, as activists, and she said, we need to do something about this. And we said, we don't know much about intersex in Malta. We don't even have a word for intersex in Maltese. You know, and she said, but if this is happening, if these surgeries and treatments are happening, then there shouldn't be any other reason, you know. We don't need lots of research. I mean, isn't it clear that there's a violation here? So at the same time, we were working on a gender recognition law for Malta, and we kind of had to go back to square one, and because we wanted to use the same process to include or try and include intersex in that process, in that building that legislation there. So because we didn't have intersex people who are out and working in Malta, we worked with our international colleagues, people like Kitty and activists in different parts of Europe and the world, to really develop a law with them. We consulted several people, as you can imagine. So we wanted to start from somewhere, and medical professionals, of course, were part of that. When I started engaging with medical professionals and the lead surgeons in Malta as well, I mean, again, Malta being so small, we only had 2 pediatric surgeons, so in a way, it's easy to identify the persons, but still, it doesn't mean that access is easy. But because the government has initiated this process, we had the backing of the government. So that gives you power. It gives you access. And the first reaction of doctors was, this has nothing to do with you. So because I was known as an LGBT activist, he was like, this is not you. This is not gay issues. You know, these are, you have nothing to do with this. This is not an LGBT issue. You're misunderstanding everything. I'm like, sure. As we do, you know. So I heard the same stories about us not understanding what we're talking about because we're not doctors. And also that it's needed. That we're talking about risk of cancer, we're talking about unacceptance, but also the stories that were coming out from the doctor's mouth were not medical justifications. They were moral, ethical, and just plain patriarchal sexist justifications. So you know, I was hearing stories like, oh, this boy will grow up and, you know, he'd be bullied because of his genitals. And I'm like, you're worried about a boy's genitals and the size of the genitals? I mean, and you're making decisions at an early stage because you're worried that this boy would be bullied and somehow feel guilty that, you know, the genitals don't look the same or they don't fit the normative idea. So this gave us a little bit more kind of ground to work on as well. The government initiated a consultation process then. So the medical professionals were part of that. We consulted the medical professionals, we consulted the general public, we consulted the church too. And in Maltese context, the church plays a big role, and we felt that including it is always a good idea. The Catholic Church, Malta is predominantly Catholic, surprisingly was not objecting or was not challenging when it came to intersex people and the arguments that we were putting forward. We also consulted social workers and psychologists and the psychosocial professionals as well. We learned many things in the process, and doctors themselves did share the difficulties they face, especially when it comes to registration, for example, you know, birth registration, and also the lack of understanding and knowledge about intersex issues, because these are rare conditions. In Malta, when there is a lack of information or lack of understanding, we go to the UK. So Malta has bilateral agreements with the UK, so when services are not provided in Malta, people are sent to the UK. And so this is also it was also something that we had to deal with, of parents being sent parents of intersex children being sent to London to Great Ormond Street Children's Hospital, where they met a multidisciplinary team, and surgeries were performed also there on Maltese kids. So when we were developing then the law, we kind of started from a very basic principle. We said we're moving away from the medical pathologizing language and attitude and approach, and we're going to adopt a human rights approach to this, because we're talking about violations of people's human rights. And this is how the law is built up. We define sex characteristics. We don't use intersex in the law, also because of language translation issues. And sex characteristics, we define sex characteristics so that even people who may not identify or relate with the word, it's capturing everyone as well. In the same way, we refer to someone's gender identity, but not necessarily call a person trans, unless that person chooses to relate and identify. So, and then the law establishes basically a right to gender identity and gender expression, but also a right to bodily integrity and physical autonomy. And it basically, it doesn't prohibit the surgeries, it defers. So it defers the decision to the person. So we stopped the surgeries, the medical unnecessary surgeries, but a person who's intersex can decide later on in life, also if they need, because sometimes there are some exceptions where they might need some interventions, but that person is making their own decision about their own body. And we also included sex characteristics as a ground under the anti-discrimination laws, because we're not just talking about medical interventions. Intersex people have a life. They experience life in different contexts, and discrimination also in different contexts. Just yesterday, actually, it's now official that we have a national health service, so we have free healthcare. So intersex and trans people now can access this national health service freely when they need treatment related to intersex variations. And this is what has been happening now after the law. Now we're filling the gaps. So we have a policy about intersex students in schools. We have the health services. We're looking at developing more training for psychosocial professionals, but also lawyers, judges, the whole lot. There's plenty. But it's just the one thing that I want to say is that the law prohibiting those surgeries should be seen as a minimum standard. That's the minimum. Then there's so much more that needs to be done. We still don't know many things about the realities of intersex people, the discrimination in education systems or the health systems, in employment. So there's so much more that needs to be done, and that's why I think the law is just it's a big step. But it's really setting a minimum standard to then build on that. I could go on forever, but I'm happy to answer any questions you may have later on as well. So thank you.
I have a presentation.
I'm going to present the report that we published in May of last year. called First Do No Harm. I've actually got the last extant printed copy because we've given all of them away, but I'm very happy to share PDFs. We have them in English and also in Danish and in German. So if anybody would like to receive a PDF copy, I can give you the link to the website or send you a PDF copy. And we're hoping to have a reprint done soon. So as Anna already mentioned, this was Amnesty's first report focusing specifically on the human rights of individuals with variations of sex characteristics. We had a policy since 2013 that allowed us to start investigating this issue, and then we carried out around 18 months of research that went into this report. There's a link to a webpage that has a little overview of it. And we chose to look specifically at Denmark and Germany, not because we think the situation in these two countries is particularly bad or particularly good, but we chose to look at them as illustrative examples of the situation in Europe. Because as Ruth has already mentioned, it's our understanding that the practices that take place in these two countries are echoed in other European countries and indeed in other countries around the world. And we chose, similar to the discussions that happened in Malta, to focus on individuals who are born with variations of sex characteristics, that is, genitals, gonads, hormones, chromosomes, or reproductive organs that differ in some way from what is considered to be the norms for male or female bodies. We also looked a little bit at secondary sex characteristics that develop around puberty, but we focused particularly on individuals with variations of primary sex characteristics. And the number of people who have these variations of sex characteristics is around 1.7% of the population, which is not a small number. The comparator that we usually use is that that's about the number of people who have red hair. So it's not a small number. And we chose to look at individuals with variations of sex characteristics, including those individuals who are born with ambiguity in their sex characteristics, where it is not obvious from birth whether the child will be raised male or female. But we also wanted to include the situation of individuals whose sex characteristics were close to, but not exactly within the norms for male and female. As Kitty's already mentioned, we're aware that there's a lot of discussion in the medical profession about who is or isn't considered intersex or intersex enough to be covered by policies. And so we chose to take it as an inclusive definition as possible and to talk about all of the individuals who have these variations. And we chose to focus specifically on normalizing surgeries that are performed on children with variations of sex characteristics. So these are surgeries that are performed not for emergency reasons to preserve the life or health of the child, surgeries that are invasive and irreversible, and that are underpinned by gender stereotypes, underpinned by assumptions about what the body of a boy or a girl should look like. The way that we carried out the research is we spoke to individuals who had experienced these surgeries as children. We spoke also with parents of children with variations who have been asked to make decisions or put in a position where they've had to make decisions about their children, often with insufficient information provided to them. We spoke with practicing and some retired physicians and faced a similar situation as Ruth did, where we were asked as human rights specialists, well, why are you looking at this issue? This isn't a human rights issue, this is a medical issue. I sat in a number of interviews with physicians where my qualifications were questioned, my understanding of the issues were questioned. Even since the report launch, we have been told that as Amnesty International, we're not medical professionals, we don't know what we're talking about, but our position is very much that, yes, this is an issue that involves the medical profession, but it is a human rights issue. It's about the human rights of individuals who are born with these variations. We also reviewed medical literature. We also reviewed available data. And similar to the situation that Kitty's found in Iceland, there is very little data available. Even in countries like Denmark and Germany, where good records are kept, it was very, very difficult to get data about the number of individuals who are born with variations, the number of diagnoses by the medical professional, and the number of surgeries carried out. And we also spoke with human rights defenders, some of whom consider themselves intersex, some of whom do not use that term to describe themselves. We spoke with human rights defenders in Germany and Denmark, but also with other people, including Kitty and other members of OII Europe who work in other European countries. And they're not on the slide, but we also spoke with patient groups, so with support groups for individuals who have been diagnosed with a particular medical condition, who may or may not consider themselves intersex, who may or may not consider themselves as human rights defenders. And I think the key finding was that in both Germany and Denmark, that these normalizing surgeries are continuing. As I said before, it's very difficult to get data. In Denmark, we were able to obtain a small amount of data. In the period 2011 to 2015, we were able to find out that there were over 1,000 surgeries performed on individuals with cases of hyperspadias, and that the vast majority of these, almost 90%, were on individuals under the age of 10. We also confirmed that the practices of clitoral surgeries and vaginoplasties continued in this period. In Germany, we've had some figures from 2012 to 2014. There are an average of 12 operations on the clitoris of people aged under 10 every year, and an average of just over 1,600 masculinizing surgeries performed per year. As I said before, this is the data we were able to obtain. There is other data that we couldn't obtain. And we also found that there's a lack of medical evidence supporting these surgeries. There's a lack of published studies and a lack of scientific research on this. And we found that these surgeries are human rights violations. They're violations of the the rights of the child. And the rights of the child include not just the rights of the child as it is now, but also the adult that the child will become, the child, the adolescent, and the adult in their lives. It's a violation of the rights of the child and the future adult to bodily integrity, a violation of the right to the highest attainable standard of health, and the right to be free from harmful practices based on gender stereotyping. As we've already discussed, these surgeries are not performed for emergency reasons. They are performed based on assumptions and stereotypes about what the bodies of men and women should look like. And we made a number of recommendations, and the full detailed recommendations are in the report, and we have some detailed recommendations for both Denmark and Germany as the countries of focus, but also broader recommendations for other European countries. We recommended that no child should be subjected to non-emergency, invasive and irreversible surgeries and other medical interventions with harmful effects, and that interventions should be postponed until children are able to meaningfully participate in decisions about what is done to their own bodies. We recommended the availability of psychosocial support for individuals and their families to help families and individuals themselves throughout their lives to navigate the consequences of living in a society that does not recognize intersex bodies or bodies with variations of sex characteristics. We recommended the implementation of human rights-based and child-centered healthcare protocols, and the explicit inclusion of sex characteristics in non-discrimination provisions. So I think I can leave it there, and we have, I think, about 15 minutes for questions. Thank you. Maybe this back, yes.
Thank you so much for your presentations. We at Amnesty, we love reports, we love long texts, but I have to agree with what Ruth said. We don't need research on these surgeries. They just have to stop on infants that cannot give consent. And of course, all the research, both that Amnesty has done and will do, can then support further work on this to advance all legislation and laws and practices in each country. So I want to give the floor to you if you have any questions specific regarding what has been said now. Go ahead.
Hi, I would like to ask Ruth on the Málþingið legislation. I haven't really looked into it, but is there any reference within the law on criminalization, an article of criminalization towards those that might be caught up doing surgery?
So this was a huge discussion. It was one of those discussions where, and I think following up from the law, like the passing of the law, it's kind of something that we're thinking about. We did not include, so the law is not punitive. It doesn't punish. There are fines mentioned in relation to gender identity in terms of kind of using the private details of people, for kind of to their own detriment, but it's not punitive, so there's no punishment. And that was part of the consultation process as well. We felt that was our way of also moving the law. We also felt that if we included that, the law will get stalled. So it's very strongly worded in terms of, these are these treatments should be stopped. And indeed, when the law was passed, the treatment stopped. So the doctors were very aware of the law, and they went to the other extreme of saying, we're not doing anything now. So even people who needed support didn't get it then. So that's why we then were working on a treatment protocol that is human rights-based, child-centered, to ensure that, because intersex people still need the attention and treatment sometimes, and if they have started, for example, hormonal treatment, they need to continue treatment, or there are other complications sometimes. So you cannot just stop the health services to intersex people. So that's what we did after the law. So develop a treatment protocol to make sure that the doctors follow. They have the guidelines now to follow when it comes. And also those guidelines are based on the human rights principles set by the law. So I hope that answers your question. Yeah, something I didn't mention was that it was very much child. So we felt that also the approach was very much rights of the child, and it is very possible that what got broader acceptance as well. So it wasn't just we queers calling for, I don't know, but it was also the rights of the child, which in Malta there's broad agreement on, so nobody is against the rights of the child, right? So it was also an approach from us, when we work in the law.
You were first.
Yeah.
Yeah, so similar to here, in Malta we don't have patient groups. So support groups, the idea of support groups wasn't there. So, or at least we were not aware. We're not aware of any of these groups. Part of the law is also to ensure psychosocial support and counseling, both to parents and families, so think about the life cycle of an intersex person. So both in terms of family members and relatives, but also then to the intersex people later on in life. It's in process. So it's something that we're working with, and it's part of these guidelines to provide, because it would fall within the National Health Service system to provide support, counseling, and other kind of care to intersex people and their families.
Thank you. We have 3 more questions. I would like to ask you to repeat the question you get, because we have, the session is being streamed, so that viewers at home can actually hear the question, okay?
Okay.
So it was first over here.
Yes, is it a question? I have context as good to what you have accomplished or gone into and been involved in. I'm touched by that. Thank you.
Okay, here was one question.
Yes, thank you. I'm just going to start by thank you all very much, both you and the previous panel. This has been extremely interesting, enlightening, and encouraging to listen to you all. My question has to do with, I mean, we are talking about turning away from the medical approach into a human rights approach. And I'm just wondering, being a politician myself, the main opposition, does it come from the medical sector or other sectors? And for example, the legislature and politicians, are they more just being indifferent rather than being opposed to this change of mindset? Just where should the focus be when you're trying to move forward?
Yeah.
If you can talk in general, I don't really know where to point the question, and I'm more thinking about, for example, Europe as a whole, if you can.
Do you want to answer? And then because I feel like talking.
Yes, maybe just.
Do you want to repeat the question?
Okay, the question is whether opposition to what we're trying to do comes from medical professionals first or other groups in society as well. In my experience is the medical professionals are definitely the first to speak about their concerns and trying to explain what already has been explained by my colleagues, that why are you dealing with these issues? These are people suffering from a medical condition, and we know exactly what we are doing to them and why we are doing it, and we're doing it in the benefit of the child. So please, be formulated in a quite polite way, but please stay out of our way. They are the first to speak against what we are trying to do. When I was preparing my report on the European Forum, we got some opposition from, let's say, more conservative countries as well, mainly Eastern European countries. I'm not going to name them, that's not important, but from a more conservative attitude in general. The same people being against abortion, being against LGBT rights in general. When I'm looking back at it's the most difficult to deal with are the medical professionals, because they have this aura of they're almost untouchable. Or at least they feel themselves as being untouchable, and by society they're looked at with great admiration. Might be a little bit exaggerated, but with a lot of. Yes, people always, they are sick, they are ill, they don't feel good, they go to a doctor, to a medical professional, and they get cured, they get the proper attention, and they feel thankful and grateful about it. So it was difficult to challenge it is difficult to challenge their attitude. From legislative side, it might be more indifferent. People really don't know what we are talking about. That's why we started at the Belgian level with we did there were two research projects just to raise awareness among medical professionals and to try to collect some data from the Belgium side, and which is really difficult, as was the same for Germany and Denmark. So I think we have to focus on both at the same time. We should keep in touch with the medical professionals, definitely, whether they like it or not. We should talk to them over and over and over and over again. And at the same time, we should try to prepare the legislation, as Malta did, as Portugal is doing, and Iceland as well. So from my point of view, I think we have to focus on both of them, but with a different set of arguments and different set of answers to their questions, definitely. So please.
Yeah. Yes, just to add to what Piet said, we hear from doctors who say that, of course, we wouldn't be doing anything that isn't medically necessary. Therefore, the surgeries that we're doing are medically necessary, that make the argument that this is in the best interests of the child for the reasons that have already been outlined, that if the child grows up with a body that is in some way different from the norms for male or the norms for female, then that child will face bullying in later life. Doctors also tell us that even if they're not convinced, they are under pressure from parents. And parents, we know in the vast majority of cases, want to do what's best for their child, but parents need to be provided with all the information about their child's situation, about the consequences of intervening and the consequences of not intervening, so that they are able to make an informed choice. And legislators, yes, I think vary from lack of information. We saw in Germany, for example, a well-meaning piece of legislation that was designed, that intended to reduce the number of surgeries by requiring that an intersex child be registered without a gender marker, but we understand that didn't have the desired effect, didn't have an impact on the number of surgeries, and in fact it was perceived as quite stigmatizing by a lot of intersex activists. So it was a well-meaning piece of legislation that didn't have the desired effect. So yeah, we see a range of responses.
Yeah, I would say the main challenge or objection was coming from the medical professionals, and I think we need to be careful on how we say that as well, because not all medical professionals are the same, and we still need medical professionals. But so we got different reactions. There were some doctors who were really willing to work with us because they lacked clarification on what to do when they are faced with an intersex child. So they lack the tools, they lack the guidelines. So they welcomed anything that is done in the area. There were reluctance. The reluctance was around, changing the protocols, the guidelines. It's like the Holy Bible and changing aspects of that. And that's how it felt. It was about, these are set standards. They're international. Who are we to change those? So it was mixed also feelings within the medical professionals. When it came to legislators, it was really lack of knowledge. The one thing that was challenging was around the issue of consent. So just to put it out there as well, because consent, when it comes to children, consent lies with the parents or the guardians or legal guardians. So we really spent a lot of time discussing consent and what that means, and shifting that consent to the person, including the child. So that was the only, I think, kind of barrier, kind of trying to overcome understanding consent when it comes to children and minors. The other, and what worked and what helped in overcoming all these barriers was the political will. We had a government and the minister, I would say the minister herself, who just said, we want to change this, we need to change this. And she worked very hard to then, with her colleagues as well. But the political will, we wouldn't have done it if there wasn't political will, just plain and simple. So political will is key to changing laws, policies, but also the awareness, social awareness. Politicians have lots of powers too. People look up or down to politicians, depends how you see it, but they usually look up to them, so they are influence the general public. And so the position of politicians and their presence in the process is very important.
I think we have time for one question before the break. And then again we can close the discussion later on.
Go ahead.
Thank you very much. I have a question about Malta. And a question about what I would like to, I'm interested in knowing about the effect that the law and the discussion around the law have on the general public. I mean, if the knowledge of intersex and trans issues are very high in generally, if it's just you know what I mean, and also if this has become a subject in schools and kids are, if you're actually teaching kids and students about this.
So yeah, the question is about, sorry?
And also prejudice and if they affect the job.
Okay. Yeah, the question about knowledge amongst the general public about intersex issues and whether we're teaching this in schools as well. The knowledge is the awareness and knowledge is very low. in generally. So when we were working on the law, because this was also a gender recognition law, and there was a gender recognition aspect, there was a tendency to conflate, to mix trans and intersex. So that was our aim, to say, look, we're talking about different things here. Some intersex may be trans, but we're talking about different things. So I would say awareness and knowledge is very low. As a result of the law, maybe there are few more people who are aware, but we need definitely to work on that. The policy on around schools and education is focused a lot on the support plans for trans and intersex students. So how should educators and schools react or behave around trans and intersex students? Less so it's less, it's not about being in the curricula yet. We're still getting there. And this is why I said there are plenty more to do. And that includes getting also other issues in our curricula. So there's plenty more that needs to be done in other areas, for sure.
Okay, thank you so much. We will take around 15 minutes break, so we come in 2:15 again, and we will continue our discussion after the break. Outside we have coffee and some refreshments, so I hope to see you all here after the break. Thank you.